Hello, and welcome to the Dance Physio Podcast, a podcast designed to explore ideas and foster discussion around dancer health and wellness. We're here to challenge the status quo, bridge the gap between dance science and the studio, and help change the landscape of the dance industry for the better. I'm your host, Erika Mayall, a dancer turned physiotherapist who is deeply passionate about leaving the dance world better than I found it. I'm so glad you're here. Let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Dance Physio Podcast. I am your host, Erika Mayall. I feel like it's been a really long time since I have sat down to record a podcast episode. And in reality, I think it was only 2 weeks that we were off over the holidays. But just getting out of that regular routine, it feels like it's been ages. So I'm really excited to be back. And I have lots of fantastic episodes in store for you for 2026. So I'm so glad you are also here and listening. I hope you had a wonderful holiday season, whatever that looked like for you, whether it was slow time at home relaxing or traveling or hustle and bustle with lots of family and friends, whatever that looked like. I hope you all had a really, really wonderful holiday season. I am really excited to be back with another episode, the first episode of 2026. But before we dive into that, I just want to take a second to remind you that if you have not subscribed to the podcast, this is a fabulous time to do it so that you are always up to date with all of the latest episodes. You can do that on whatever platform you listen to the podcast on. And also, I have set a goal for myself for 2026, which I need your help with. My goal is to get more ratings and reviews of the podcast, specifically on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, because those are the two platforms that the majority of people are listening to the podcast on. But if you're listening on another platform, I absolutely welcome ratings and reviews as well. It really helps the podcast be found by other people who are looking for the topics and similar podcasts and want to listen to it. So if you have not already left a rating, ideally a 5-star rating, or a review for the podcast, if you would take a second to go do that right now, it will really help me towards my goal of getting more ratings for the podcast in 2026. All right, moving into today's podcast episode, we are going to talk about my word of the year. And this was a podcast episode that I did last year around this time. I actually think it might have published before New Year's last year. And I did a podcast episode talking about my word of the year, but then more specifically talking about goal setting in general and specifically for dancers, goal setting and all of that. And it was really well received. I was actually shocked. It was a podcast topic that I was interested in doing an episode on, but I wasn't sure that there would be a lot of interest in it. It's different than a lot of what I talk about when I'm talking specifically about certain injuries or rehab protocols and things like that. But it was one of the top rated episodes of 2020, whatever year it was. I think it published right at the end of 2024. But anyway, it's been one of the more popular episodes. So I figured, why not share my word of the year again? And if you have not listened to last year's episode, if you're at all curious about my word for last year, I will link that episode in the show notes here. But more specifically, in last year's episode, I did talk a lot about goal setting and how to set SMART goals using the SMART acronym for goal setting, and specifically breaking down dance-specific goals and especially physical goals, whether it was like flexibility or strength or things like that. So if that's more of what you're looking for and you have not heard that episode yet, linked in the show notes, I'm going to put 2025's episode. Today, I'm mostly just going to talk about my word of the year. So if you are new around here or don't follow me on social media or that sort of thing, for the last many, many years, I can't remember how many years exactly now, but for the last many years, have been choosing a word of the year. This is kind of in lieu of New Year's resolutions. I've never loved the idea of New Year's resolutions. And I think it's actually the word resolution that I really don't identify with and really, for whatever reason, sort of like rubs me the wrong way. Or maybe it is that when people are talking about New Year's resolutions, it generally is like with a negative connotation in terms of things they're trying to
change or like habits they're trying to break. And so people will say, I'm going to, lose weight. I'm going to eat healthy. I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to quit smoking or whatever. Those are just like very common things that we'll hear in terms of resolutions. And for whatever reason, and even when I was small, I have not loved that idea. And it, like I said, I think it's more the word than anything, because I absolutely am a goal setter and I set goals for myself, but I don't necessarily only do that in January. So again, for me, this idea of it being like it has to be the start of a new year in order to be setting goals, and whether that's personal goals or business goals or things like that, that doesn't sit super well with me. And if that works for you, like have at it, power to you. I just, for me personally, have never loved the idea of New Year's resolutions and having to have this kind of like, start of the year arbitrary start date of changing these types of things. However, that being said, I have for the past I actually don't remember what year I started. I'm going to say it was probably like 7 or 8 years ago. I have been choosing a word of the year instead. And the idea behind having a word is just that it is a word that you can come back to. It is a word that I will use kind of to set an intention for how I want my year to be, what I want the focus of the year to be. It can help guide decisions. It's often a word to come back to if I'm feeling ungrounded or unsure or unmotivated a lot of the time. It's a word that just, it gives you just a little bit more of like a sense of what you want the year to be. And some years I've picked words that maybe have served me a bit more in a business sense, or picked words that I've intentionally wanted to influence business. And some years the words have been maybe a little bit more to do with my personal life. And some years they're words that I feel like work well in both settings. And there's no right or wrong sort of way to pick a word or rules about this. Like it's all made up. It's all arbitrary. But for me, this is what works and what I tend to prefer in terms of setting kind of quote unquote New Year's resolutions. Like I said, I can't remember exactly how many years I've been doing it for, but I do have my words written down from 2019 onwards. I know I did it before that, but I didn't post them on social media, therefore don't have a permanent record of them. I mean, I'm sure they're written down somewhere in some notebook that's buried somewhere. But I can tell you that for 2019, my word was focus. For 2020, my year was connect, which every time I look back at that, I kind of think it's like a little bit ironic given that 2020 was the year of kind of isolation and staying home. But at the beginning of that year, I had chosen the word connect or connection. 2021, my word was expand. 2022, my word was reach. 2023, my word was content, which also happens to be content. And so that was like sort of a little bit of a double meaning and the same spelling, and that was intentional that year. 2024, my word was elevate. And then in 2025, last year, my word was flourish. I often get questions about how I go about choosing a word for the year. And sometimes it comes to me really organically. It'll just pop into my head, or I'll be doing something or thinking about something, and I'm like, that's my word for next year. Like that's my intention. That is the feeling I want, or what have you. And some years I have to really think about it and sit on it and kind of try out a few different words. I've often know my word at some point in December, sometimes even early on in December, or start to like think about, like reflecting back on my previous word and start to think about what my word is going to be. This year, I only just came up with my word. It really took me a long time. And it's not to say that I wasn't thinking about it, but I had a few words that were sort of swirling around, and it took me a while to kind of come up with words. I'm in a business networking group, and we actually, for the last few years, have been sharing our words within the group. And there's like a thread in our Facebook group that we have, and people put their words and how they intend to use it throughout the year. And we actually, in one of our last like calls of the year, we will like share words and discuss words and stuff. And even on those calls this year, I didn't have a word yet. I sort of, was listening to other people, and I had a list of words and things that were kind of like popping in and out, but I hadn't settled on one yet. There are people in that group who will use AI like ChatGPT to help, and you can put in all the prompts if you're like, I really want to come up with a word, but I don't know how to do it. You could, if you wanted, put in, what your intentions are for the year, what you want your year to feel like, what tone you want it to have, things you might want to accomplish, goals you have, whatever it is. Put as much information as you can into some sort of a tool like that, like ChatGPT, and it will give you a list of words, and it will give you some, reasons why it selected those words for you. And so sometimes that really helps people to be like, yes, that is the word I'm going to settle on. So there's no right and wrong way to pick a word. This year, I've actually really, really struggled picking between 3 different words. And I think I have settled on one. I'm going to tell you about it in a second. But I actually have these 2 other words in the back of my head still. And maybe I'll have 3 words this year, or maybe I'll realize halfway through the year that one works better than another. Who knows? But for this year, there's sort of 3 words that are similar maybe in some senses. And so again, there's no rules. The rules are made up. You can do whatever you want. I have friends, or I know people who, instead of picking a singular word of the year, they'll pick a phrase for the year. It might be a quote. It might be a phrase they come up with themselves. I know people who pick a song, so it's more of like an anthem that they have throughout the year. You can do whatever you want. There's no right and wrong. So my word for 2026, I have decided, is going to be curate. And like I said, 2 other words that were spinning around in my head along with curate. One of them was cultivate. And curate and cultivate are not quite the same thing, but the way that I am thinking about those words were sort of similar, but I settled on curate, and I'll tell you why in a second. And then the other word that it was also sort of the top 3 on my list, the one that was like, also made it hard for me to decide, was the word attune. And so again, those words are not all exactly the same, but there are some similarities between them. But my word for 2026 is going to be curate. And one of the things that I like to do when I'm selecting my word of the year is I really love like linguistics and definitions of words, and even like origins of words and etymology and things like that. And so I will always then go and look up the definition of words when I'm trying to narrow it down. And so with those top 3 words, with curate, with cultivate, with attune, I was looking at, what are the different definitions, or how can this word sort of be used? And so as far as curate goes, obviously there's loads of different definitions, and it also, sometimes with the words, we're looking at words that can be used as like a noun and also as a verb and things like that. But some of the definitions that spoke to me a little bit in terms of curate is to select and bring together people or groups for a purpose. And so from a business side of things, I really liked how it is kind of bringing together people. One of my intentions for this year, or one of the things I feel like I'm being pulled to a little bit more, is a little bit more in-person connections and like community and collaborations. I think we've gone, there was like that pendulum swing to the online space that probably started a little bit before 2020, but really in 2020 became like this really big draw to the online space. And the online space has served me really, really well. And I've really enjoyed connecting with people and teaching courses online and all of that. But I think this year I'm craving just a little bit more in-person community and connections and collaborations and things like that. And so I like the idea of curate being selecting and bringing together people or groups for a particular purpose. Another definition is to carefully choose, arrange, and present in order to get a particular effect. And so that's a little bit more like curate in the sense of maybe what we think in like, like a curator in an art museum or whatever, where they're choosing and arranging and presenting information. But for me, this part of the definition again spoke to me because I do a lot of teaching, and whether that's like through a podcast medium or in-person workshops or online webinars or things like that, I spend a lot of time teaching, and I actually think that like one of my superpowers is taking more complex information and ideas and being able to synthesize them and present them in a way that's really digestible to the audience. And whether that be dancers or whether that be dance teachers or whether that be other healthcare professionals, whoever that audience is. And so that idea of curating the information that can then be shared within the wider dance community really spoke to me. And then another definition that came up, and again, very, very similar, but select, organize, and present, typically using professional or expert knowledge. So again, very similar to the previous definition, but those ideas of like curating information really kind of spoke to me when I was looking up some of the definitions. In terms of like how I intend to use the word this year, I'm not tied to the definition of the word. That's not the intention of this. But again, like I said, it's just like a way of having an overall feeling of what you want your year to look like, or if you're making decisions or things like that, to think, okay, how does this serve me in terms of like using this word as a guide for the year? So for me, when I think about curate and I think about what that looks like for 2026 for me, I think I'm thinking about thoughtfully choosing what I want to give my time or my energy or my attention to, and also just as intentionally, like what I don't want to give my time or energy or attention to. So really curating those experiences and those like connections around me. And also it being a little bit of a practice of maybe clarity and boundaries and alignment, both in life and in business. So again, like I feel like curate is a word that can actually serve me really well from a business standpoint, but also in personal life as well. And so again, being really like thoughtful in choosing how I'm spending my time and energy. I think a lot of people who work in healthcare specifically, but even people who work in the dance industry, if you're a dance teacher, we're people pleasers a lot of the time. We want to be very giving. We want to help people. We can be, people pleasers is probably the easiest way to put that. And I don't want to get rid of that side of me. Like I am a helping person. I do genuinely want to help people, but also recognizing that it is important to do that with intention and curate how it is that I'm helping people, and having a little bit more clarity of boundaries and alignment in that, I think is going to be important for me moving forward. So those were the things in terms of curate that really pulled me towards this word this year. But like I said, cultivate and attune were really high up there as well for very similar reasons. And that sort of curate and cultivate, like there's a little bit of like a tug of war between those two words, because they're similar in some ways in terms of like what my intentions for the year are, but they're also a little tiny bit different. So it shall remain to be seen whether curate ends up continuing to be my word for the year, or whether maybe cultivate starts to feel a little bit more pull towards that. Who knows? But that is my intention for the year. Those are my words. And I hope that was interesting for you, or maybe helpful. I know I've gotten lots of questions in the past about like, how do you choose a word, or like, what are the rules or whatever. And so that gives you a bit of an insight into my process of choosing a word. I would love to hear if you also are someone who chooses a word of the year, whether you've done it regularly for years and years, or maybe this is a new practice for you and you want to try it this year. I would love to hear from you, and I would love to hear what your word is if you want to share. I think it's always great to hear, how what word people are choosing, but then also how they are intending to use that word. The other thing that I will say, especially if you're new to this practice, is I find it really helpful to have the word written down in a place that's really visible. And so this, again, can look like different things. There's been a year where I actually had the word what's the right word? Engraved isn't the right word. It was stamped on a piece of jewelry. It was a bracelet. And so if I was wearing the bracelet, every time I looked at it, I could see my word for that year. So, you can have something that's like really, really visible like that. Other years, I just write it in a notebook that, is my notebook that I carry around with me every day. So every time I open that notebook, I'll see my word of the year. That's most commonly where I'm writing it down, and will sort of have it visible. But there's been years where I've actually like printed it out and put it in a picture frame and put it on my desk, so it's like framed and in front of me. I just think it's helpful to have that visual sense. I did not do that last year. Last year, my word was flourish, and I didn't print it out anywhere or really have it super visible. And honestly, I didn't come back to it a lot during the year. I'm not sure that it was a word that really aligned throughout the year for a variety of reasons. But when I was going back and thinking about it, interestingly, I did not really have it super visible. And so when we were having our business networking meeting and talking about our previous words and then coming up with our future ones, I actually had to go back and scroll Instagram to figure out what my word for 2025 was, because in like end of November, beginning of December, I couldn't even remember what it was because, like I said, like I just wasn't coming back to it throughout the course of the year. And that's not to say that it was like a quote unquote bad word or anything, but just for a variety of reasons and with some things that happened over the course of last year, it ended up maybe not being the most grounding word for me. So I, this year, do intend to write my word down, have it a little bit more visible, and see if that helps for it to, have a bit more of an impact on my year, but also knowing that sometimes we pick a word and then something happens throughout the year and that word ends up not being the one that feels the most aligned. And that is 100% fine as well. Some years the words have felt so aligned and have served me so well. And other years it's maybe not as much. And that is absolutely okay. So, like I said, if you are picking a word and you want to share it with me, please send me a message on social media or send me an email. My email's in the show notes. I would love to hear from you and hear what your words are for this year. And also, I'm going to throw this out right now, if you're still listening. Part of me wanting to have this word of like curate or cultivate or whatever word we're going to use, you can still hear I'm still wavering back and forth between the two, is that I do want to, or I have intentions of having more community and connections and collaboration and ideally more in-person connections and things like that. So if you are listening and you want to connect in any way, shape, or form, it does not have to be in person. I know a lot of the listeners are all over the world, but if you have interesting ways that you want to connect or collaborate or create community or things like that, please reach out and let me know. That is definitely one of my intentions for this year, is to be really intentional about that. So I'm just going to throw that out into the universe at the beginning of the year and see what happens. All right, that's all I've got for you today. Like I said, if you're interested in more about specifically goal setting, if that's something that you're thinking about right at the beginning of the year as well right now, go back and listen to the episode from 2025. I will link that in the show notes because I talk about my word of the year, but I talk a lot more about goal setting in that episode as well. Once again, thank you so much for listening, especially to this very first episode of 2026. I'm so excited to kick off another year of the Dance Physio podcast. If you have requests or suggestions of podcast topics that you want to see or guests that you would love to hear on the podcast in 2026, please send me a message. Let me know. I am doing lots of scheduling and stuff right now, and I would love to hear your suggestions. So once again, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.